Hey guys, Magnificent One here. Let's talk about anti-heroes and why they seem to be disappearing. Unfortunately, we now live in a world where heroes kind of have to be what I'm gonna call safe. What I mean by safe is they have to have the right opinions, they can't be too critical, they can't even hate any particular group. So essentially, they have to exist in a world where they themselves have no biases. They themselves are pretty much flawless when it comes to their ethics and their morality, as opposed to being somebody who has a lot of issues, has problems, does not necessarily like certain groups of people, and basically does not go along with the overall overarching narrative that the media wants you to follow. I say that because we have very few anti-heroes left. So very recently, the Punisher, who is probably the best known anti-hero in comics, he was the first guy who came in and who did things which were borderline criminal and insane. He murdered people. He came back from Vietnam, had probably some PTSD issues, and then his family was murdered in front of his eyes. And that was the driving factor that really made him the person that he was, and that he would go and he'd kill criminals to the point where if you were doing something that normally would just land you in jail, you would now end up being shot in the head. So if you're selling drugs, you might get a 2 to 3 year stint in prison, but if you sold drugs and Frank Castle caught you selling drugs, you got a bullet in the brain. Now that changed. They did something terrible. They basically cut off his balls. What I mean by that is they had a story where they brought his wife back, and instead of it being, a heartfelt reunion of love between a man and the woman who basically is the driving force behind his purpose as being an anti-hero, as being a vigilante. Instead, it was just, oh, hey, I was going to divorce you anyhow, so I'm going to take your money and I'm going to hurt you, and you suck. And it was terrible. Anyhow, so my whole point is the the comic book industry. When I say comic book industry, I'm talking about the big two, Marvel and DC. They seem to have completely lost their edge. You can't have edgy characters anymore. You can't have characters that would say things which are controversial. You can't have characters which are going to do things that are controversial. Instead, you basically have a whole bunch of mediocre, non-distinctive characters that do the same things, believe in the same things. I mean, we're even at the point where the villains don't act evil. We're at a point where the villains act alongside the heroes. When you look at like for example, the X-Men books now, you've got guys like Apocalypse going out there and working alongside the X-Men. In what world, in what universe should that ever happen? Apocalypse was the antithesis of what the X-Men stood for. Apocalypse was the person who basically said not only are mutants superior, but a subset of those mutants are the selected few who should rule the world. Whereas the X-Men were, well, supposedly in a fight for equality, but if you read the books now, you would see that's definitely no longer the case. Anyhow, so the the problem that we face now with this is you will have a bunch of heroes that don't actually stand for anything. Because if everybody's thinking the same way, if everybody has the same thoughts, along with the villains, then you have a mockery of good and evil. You see, understanding what good is the key to making a good comic book story arc. And what I mean by that is to be good is to stand up for particular values, even though they might not be popular, and also to do those in the face of criticism and to do those in the face of any sort of crisis or challenges that you would face. Now, it seems like if you had a hero who might have had a dissenting view, they would probably write a storyline where he learns his lesson because the other comic book characters show them the ways of how they should better themselves. I miss anti-heroes, true anti-heroes. The Punisher, Lobo, Wolverine, real anti-heroes who would basically fulfill what is, let's face it, the male power fantasy of going out there and doing things that you wish you could do, but you can't. And it's important because we've gotten to this place where essentially a lot of writers, they're not that great. And so they make a lot of their stories based on essentially dissecting and breaking down and deconstructing characters. If you do it, you will get a pop in sales temporarily. You'll get a pop in popularity. And it's easy for the novice to look at you and say, wow, what a story. What a great writer. They took this person and they deconstructed them and they showed that it's not all just sunshine and rainbows. It's very easy to do. But at the same time, you destroy decades of lore, decades of storyline. So Luke Skywalker, who spent 3 movies it being built up to be a certain type of person, it's very easy to just deconstruct them and say, oh, he's a grumpy old man and he's actually kind of evil because he wanted to kill one of his students. It's easy to take Han Solo and go, you know what, deadbeat dad. And then people will look at you and the novice goes, that's a cool take on a character. And then all of a sudden that writer thinks they're freaking Alan Moore or something like that. But they're not. Because what is a lot tougher to do is to create a character who starts off as a Spider-Man villain and then over time build a little bit of backstory, a little bit more backstory, give him certain attributes, competencies, skills, personality traits that are all aligned to make an overarching person that is the character. And then you can just wipe it out in the stroke of a pen by just writing, hey, you know those, what is it? When did the Punisher come into place? 1980s. Well, you know those 30 years of backstory? They'll just wipe it all away. And that's a problem because we see this more and more and more. Because then what happens is the reader starts to lose faith. They start to lose the commitment to a character, to the storyline, to the history of a comic book. Because if I have 30 years of comic book history that suddenly gets changed and there's nothing sacred, what's the point of collecting books, collecting those stories, knowing the history, knowing those little nuances of what happened in one particular issue or another? If I have 30 years of seeing Bobby Drake as kind of a, maybe not a womanizer, but definitely a little bit of a ladies' man, and then all of a sudden you go, you know what'd be neat? Let's just make him gay. Mm, kind of tough to want to commit to following another character for 30 years. Or if you have Tim Drake, here's a guy who for decades, again, had certain qualities of character, certain personality traits. And in an instant, you just say, nope, gay guy. We'll just turn him gay. It's, again, betraying the essence of the character. Harley Quinn. Hey, Harley Quinn was kind of a ditzy, dumb person who followed the Joker around, almost like a groupie, was obsessed with him. Nope, change it, make her gay. Well, I mean, there's obviously a pattern here. It just seems like they're just taking characters to make them gay, but that's obvious. Anyhow, my point is when we start losing the core essences of characters, we just switch and we deconstruct them. You don't really have a true set of heroes anymore. You just have targets. Who's the next hero I can deconstruct? Who's the next person who on the surface has great qualities, attributable type of values that I can tear down. And then that is why people lose interest in the comic book industry. In any case, those are just my thoughts. If you have your own thoughts on it, or if you disagree, put them in the comments.